Rob, for anyone who doesn't know you, who are you and what do you do?
So my name is Rob Hobson. I'm a registered nutritionist. I do a lot of work in the media. I do a lot of work with brands. I've had a career that spans sort of 20 odd years at the moment. I've got 3 degrees in nutrition, so I know what I'm talking about. Yeah, that's it really. That's me.
And how did you first get into nutrition?
I originally actually did a degree in accountancy, and I was quite young. You know, when you have to decide what you want to do, and I don't think it's really possible at that age to decide what you want to do. And anyway, I then decided I wanted to go back and do nutrition, because I was always really interested in food, cooking from a young age. I was really fit, always active, so it kind of felt like the right career to go into.
And what do you think, when you started off in nutrition, what was the most important thing going on at the time in the space?
So for me, when I started, it was all about, I was doing a lot of work in public health. So a lot of stuff around school meals and improving the food in those kind of settings, vulnerable group settings. So school meals, under 5s, care homes, hospitals, that was very much in the news. The message around personal diet was still low fat, I think, at that time. We hadn't long had nutrition standards in place in terms of how many calories you should eat and that kind of thing. So all of that was kind of bubbling away, but for me it was more around the public health side of things.
And on the school meals front, do you think that that's changed into a more positive direction now?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it has. So we had these legislated standards that schools had to follow, and actually one of my jobs at that time was working for a software company. We used to design the software that schools, care homes use to plan their menus nutritionally and get them to balance. And it was legislated that they had to kind of use this software to meet those standards. And this is a really key area that we do need to target, especially with policy, is making sure that school meals are really good, especially with all the UPF thing that's going on. So yeah, I think I'm not sure if it's the same as it was.
So what do you think right now on the school meal front? What is the biggest issue that we have? Is it the UPFs?
I'm not sure. The UPFs, well, the last standards that I work with, you couldn't have UPFs, obvious UPFs like chocolate, crisps, all those kind of things, fizzy drinks. But I think that in order to make foods a budget at cost that have to feed a lot of people, they're probably using some UPF ingredients to achieve that. It doesn't mean that all those ingredients that are UPFs are necessarily bad. Yeah, I think also a good point to make here is that just because food is home cooked as well doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy. Yeah. So there was something in the press a few months ago about the sort of cakes and biscuits that were made in school that are made fresh but still really high in sugar. Yeah. So, you know, it's finding a balance, isn't it?
And what was the work that you were doing in public health?
So I did a lot of work working with vulnerable groups and communities, so teaching them education work mainly around how to eat healthier. And then a lot of it was around the school meal thing. So working with local authorities, working with big catering companies, working with individual schools, care homes, nurseries, to try and help them to understand how to make healthier food, basically. So a bit of training, a bit of putting together policies in school to help them meet the school food trust standards. And then I actually set up a little company when I went off on my own, which was helping older people to eat well. So it's Hope Nutrition. And it was all about educating care home groups in how to help older people to eat well. Because I just felt like that was an area where there wasn't enough focus. Yeah. And a lot of older people were not treated with the dignity and respect that they deserved. They weren't being fed properly. There was this idea that they didn't really know what was going on, so we'll just give them anything to eat. So that was really interesting, but really challenging. You know, the budgets were really small for food, so trying to achieve a balanced diet with such small budgets was always quite tricky. But yeah, just going in and educating the carers how to help older people to eat well, including those with dementia, was really interesting. Yeah. So
what do you think is, because the common theme there is the education side, but I think there's a lot of conversation at the moment of the food industry also having so much impact on what we eat and what we think is good. What do you think is the more important side, the education side, or kind of knowing what the food industry is doing behind the scenes?
I think it's a bit of everything, you know. I think that we probably need a bit more transparency with the food industry. You know, there's a lot of food labelling, this sort of health halo stuff that kind of disguises UPFs especially, and UPFs are what we're really talking about when we're talking about the food industry. And you know, they now dominate a lot of people's diets. You know, we know they're low in fibre, low in key nutrients, they're hyperpalatable, they're really easy to overeat. They've got additives as well, which may have a negative impact on your health. So in that respect, they have influence what we eat quite a great deal, but I do think we do need the education as well. But it's really hard to tell people to eat better when we've got this food environment that actually promotes unhealthy eating. You know, it's everywhere, that kind of food. And for some people, they can't even access healthy food. Or healthy food, because you're on a low budget, it's not affordable. You don't have the skills to know what to do with it, the cooking skills, you know, food access might be an issue. So it's just a bit of everything. And the food environment, you know, it is, I don't want to use the word broken, but that's been used before in the media, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done to try and fix that, so that people have access to affordable fresh food. Everybody has access to it. So yeah, I think it's a mix of everything together.
What is the way that you think we could fix the food environment?
That's a big question. So, I mean, I think policy to start with. There needs to be some policy changes. You know, we have the report released this year. The white paper around the food environment was quite interesting. So we've got the sugar tax, which has been around for a while. That's helped to reduce people's intake of sugar. We've got legislation coming into place in January to stop the promotion of high fat, salt, sugar foods advertising to kids, which is really promising. There is stuff still going on in schools, so all of that stuff is important. But I think there are other things to do. You know, like I said, vulnerable groups, giving them access to affordable, minimally processed food, because at the moment it's not affordable for a lot of people. So we need to think about, how do we subsidise that? How do people, you know, other communities access that kind of food that are on a budget? And I think the education side of things as well, I'd really like to see more education in schools to kids. You know, I'm a bit out of touch with it, so I don't know exactly what is going on in schools, but I don't think there's much. And I think it's great to know how to cut an onion, or to learn how to make basic dishes and all those kind of cooking skills. But I do think what's missing are some of the life skills. You know, it'd be really useful to teach kids how to create a menu plan, how to create a shopping list from that plan, and manage a food budget, because these are skills that are going to be really valuable when you leave school, especially for teenagers. You know, this kind of forgotten group of teenagers that are not going to have these skills, going to leave home and not really know what to eat, and then the whole thing starts again. Do you see what I mean?
And what would you say? There's a lot of in the media, kind of a lot of demonization of ultra processed foods, and it kind of seems like everything's an issue with them, the additives, you know, ultra palatable, all these things. What do you think is the biggest problem with ultra processed foods?
So yeah, again, it's a big topic, and it's really nuanced, and you can't bundle all ultra processed foods into the same category. So we have this NOVA classification, which is the only thing we've got at the moment, which wasn't designed for individual foods. It was designed to study sort of intakes, population intakes. So yeah, I think the problem is people focus on the additives, but actually additives are only part of the story. It's the fact they're hyperpalatable, so they're very easy, they're very, very tasty, they hit those reward centres in your brain, that fat and that sugar that makes you want more, sort of crave more. They can have a negative impact on your gut, that kind of stuff, especially some of the additives. Not all of those additives on the back of the packet are necessarily bad for you, you know. Yeah, and the fact, like I said earlier, that they're low in fibre, low in nutrients, all that kind of stuff. But, you know, some of those, like brown breads, hummus, Weetabix, these might have one additive in, you know, and some of them are not even harmful. Barley malt extract in Weetabix is just there to help improve the flavour. There's no evidence that that is going to damage your health. So some of these offer you nutritional benefits. So I think it's really important that people realise it's okay to eat some of those foods in your diet, because they have a nutritional benefit. They're not like typical UPFs that just lack all that nutrition. These actually have a positive impact on your health. So yeah, you just can't bundle them all in the same group. I think there needs to be a reclassification.
And then when we're talking about just a diet in general, what do you think are the most, because there's so many trends and kind of fads that keep coming around. Like you said, when you started, it was the low fat. Right now, I think there's this narrative of super high protein, things like this. Do any of these have any actual merit to them, or is it just...
Yeah, again, I think it's just so nuanced. I mean, I think that the high protein thing has got a bit silly. There's this idea that you have to eat tons and tons of protein, and it's in everything. Like, we've now got protein chocolate bars and all this kind of stuff that isn't, you know, it's just, that stuff is not necessarily healthy just because it's got high in protein, a health halo on it. So I think that it's more about moderation and balance, and that's so boring, but that really is what it's about. It's not about specific foods, it's not about specific nutrients. It's about a balance and getting your right you know, just a right way of eating, like the Mediterranean diet, that kind of thing. Plenty of beans, pulses, lentils, those kind of ingredients. So I do think fibre is interesting. We don't eat enough fibre in this country, and the last NDNS survey showed that intake's actually gone down even more. So on average, we get sort of 18 grams a day. We want to be aiming for 30. I think only about 6% of women, 12% of men actually achieve that. And fibre is a really important nutrient. It's actually got so many health claims attached to it. So research showing how it can help to reduce cholesterol, help you to manage your weight, because it's quite satiating, reduce risk of colorectal cancer, certain, you know, it's important for your gut health, all that kind of thing. So I think maybe a focus on eating more fibre and less protein is probably quite a good way to go, because, you know, you're just misbalancing your diet. And then, you know, more fruits and veg. A good thing to follow is probably the 30 plants a week. I think that's really interesting. I think we do need to eat more plants. If I was going to suggest one thing that we do, then I think eating more plants is probably a good place to start. You know, lots of research around that 30 plants a week helps it improve diversity in your microbiome, and that's a really good marker of health. So yeah, I think there's, we need to start focusing on this kind of high protein type of thing, carnivore diet, you know, the emphasis on the keto diet. I'm not saying they don't work for some people, and it's fine if you want to do that, but I think it's really important that you try and get the basics nailed. You're not going to be on carnivore for the rest of your life, and you're not going to be on keto. I can guarantee that if you start it. So at some point, you're going to have to eat normally again. So just think, what is the point? Why don't you just start good habits now? You know, lots of small changes over time to improve your health. That's kind of what, for me, I think that's the best thing you can do.
And what's the biggest kind of health or nutrition lie that you've seen that people just consume a lot? Would you say it's the high protein?
Do you know, high protein has come in, and I think it's been fueled by the gym bros and all this stuff on the internet, and I don't know why it's suddenly exploded the way it has and why it has to go into everything. I mean, I even went into the supermarket the other day, and food now has the amount of protein on the label, as a label, and it's clearly the food industry, supermarkets are doing it to, you know, make that food more desirable and to try and sell more of it. But I think that for me, it's this idea that a food is going to kill or cure you. It's been around since I started doing this work. This idea that one food is a miracle cure, or it's, you know, it's going to damage your health in one way. We've had carbs are bad. We've had, you know, celery juice is going to cure everything. Seed oils are toxic. You know, all this kind of messaging has to stop. I think this is where the biggest side of misinformation comes in, just pinpointing these individual foods. Like I said, it's about your pattern of eating, your overall pattern of eating, not individual foods.
I think that comes in a lot of the time because people want to just know, I should have this, I shouldn't have this. And I guess that's where it becomes difficult to be told you can have everything maybe in a tiny bit of moderation. So like, how do you, for example, the seed oil example, I've seen that a lot of the time. A lot of people have said, you know, seed oils are terrible, they're bleached, all of these things. How does someone know what to avoid when they go into a supermarket? So I think that's almost why UPFs were branded just like terrible no matter what, because then you just look out for a single additive and you avoid it.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's so easy to understand that messaging. Seed oils are toxic, you know, it's much easier than me trying to explain the nuance of the situation. You know, on the thing of seed oils, there's lots of research that they really benefit for your health. If you're replacing butter with seed oils, it can improve your cardiovascular health. You know, a lot of this messaging has come from a weird association with UPFs. They're in UPFs and obesity rates have gone up, so therefore it must be to do with the seed oils. You know, old research that was using margarine in not a specific seed oil, and we know margarine in those days had trans fats, which isn't great. We know they're not great for your heart, the way that they affect your cholesterol levels. So I think that, I think all of that misinformation is it just kind of needs to stop. It does fizzle out, like the seed oils thing came and it's kind of fizzled out a little bit, it's lost its movement, but it does need to stop. It's confusing people.
What do you think perpetuates the continuation of these sorts of ideas going around?
Social media. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I just think people it's clickbait. People know that if they tell you something it's toxic, or it's something that's anti-industry, food industry, it's anti-pharma, it's just very easy to get people's attention with that kind of stuff because they love that sensationalized information. But often, like I said, there's more nuance to the story, and it's not always as straightforward as these guys are doing. If you look closely, often they're selling something, either a service or their own methodology to get them on podcasts and give them more exposure, or whatever it is. So you really need your wits about you to try and understand that critical thinking around what's being delivered to you. And actually, I think that's something they should educate kids in school as well, is how to critically look at what it is you're absorbing from social media, especially around diet and nutrition, because you know, the research that came out around TikTok, 98% of that information around nutrition isn't accurate. And I know a lot of teenagers use TikTok to look for that information. And the downside of that is, you know, is that going to lead to disordered eating? Is that going to lead to cutting out food groups unnecessarily, especially if you're quite young and you're at a time when you need proper nutrition for growth? You know, could that cause micronutrient deficiencies? Who knows what it is? But I think, and not even that, it even just changes the narrative in your head about nutrition. You know, it's really easy for that stuff to stick. You know, like the low-fat stuff that we had in the 90s. A lot of clients I have now in their 50s, 60s still won't touch fat because they think it's bad, and it's really hard to change their mind around that. And all that happens with this misinformation is you create that again in a younger generation, and then these ideas follow through.
Yeah, I think the most difficult thing now is that a lot of people are starting to kind of read information about the food industry impacting the research that comes out and things, and so no one knows who to trust at all. How do you think that we can, like, how are you meant to find now in this landscape credible sources of information? Like, who are you meant to trust? Yeah,
it is really difficult. I mean, from my perspective, I think if you're going on to social media, then look for people that are properly qualified, and even that is quite difficult because a lot of people have doctor, but then, you know, they're still not giving out the right advice. So look for, you know, there's some great researchers out there. You've got the Zoe lot, so you've got Sarah Berry and Tim Spector that give out some great advice. I love Dr. Ids. Do you ever follow him? So he's really cool because he really pulls people up on the misinformation. But if you can find out that if they're a registered nutritionist with the Association for Nutrition, or they're a registered dietitian with the BDA, you know, these are kind of things that you want to look for. The problem is we give out quite nuanced, balanced advice. And I think some people just find that a little bit dull. But still, they're not actually doing anything to help their diet in that way. It's just really sexy to look at something else that's, you know, got this, whatever it is, you know, the seed oils are toxic, or this new type of protein bar is going to give you these amazing gains, or whatever it is that you're listening to. That stuff is really, it's really easy to take on board and get persuaded by. And there's loads of it. I mean, you've got CMOS, there's just loads of stuff out there that's promoted that's got no research behind it.
Yeah. And then moving on to GLP-1's, what's your perspective on how GLP-1's are affecting people's nutrition?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, the GLP-1 thing. I mean, at the moment in the UK, only 200,000 people can access it through the NHS. When they access it that way, they do get this nutrition support with that, but there's a huge amount of people aside from that that are accessing it privately, which means they are not really understanding probably how to feed themselves well when they're on the drug, which comes with lots of side effects. So you do have to think carefully about the type of food that you're eating, because it slows down the transit of food through your digestive system. So you can get heartburn, nausea, and that kind of thing. So you want really light, fresh foods. But they still need to be really nutritious, because you run the risk of not eating adequately. And is that going to lead to low protein intake? Is that going to lead to low calcium intake, which could affect your bones? Are there a host of other issues that might happen because you're not getting other nutrients in your diet? So it's an education around, I think, how to produce nutrient-dense meals, got good protein, good fibre, all those other nutrients. But the problem is, if you are overweight and you've lived with that food noise in your head for a long time, that makes it really hard to change your dietary habits. Once that's gone, it's quite a nice feeling that you are not really eating that much anymore. And I think that that's one of the challenges. It's the reason I wrote my book, was to tackle low appetite eating. And one of the things I realised when I wrote it was there's two very different groups. The GLP-1 group that are quite pleased that they're not eating, so making them aware of what they do have to eat to maintain their health. But then you've got this other group who might not be eating because of recovery, they might be mental health issues, aging, any of those things, and they need to be rehabilitated to eat well, you know, nursed into it. I hate the word nurse, but you know what I mean. They need to be sort of encouraged to eat a better diet to recover. So yeah, so it's interesting. I'm finding it a very interesting topic right now.
And how do you deal with the lower appetite? Because I have a friend who is on Ozempic at the moment, and she just eats, whenever she does eat, she eats extremely unhealthy, just whatever is around, just a few like chocolate bars, and then goes on her way. Yeah. How does that impact? How are GLP-1s impacting people like that who don't necessarily have the education around it, who are getting the drug privately, for example, and aren't being told that they need to eat a certain way?
Well, this is the problem, isn't it? I mean, without that information, you don't really, I mean, what does that mean when you come off the drug? You haven't really learned anything about eating well. And it is probably quite scary for a lot of people when they come off the drug, because the drugs are expensive at the moment. I'm sure they will go down in price when they become a lot more accessible, but right now they're expensive. And if you suddenly can't afford them and all of that food noise comes back, it's quite scary to think, oh, I've lost all this weight and now all I want to do is eat again. So I think if you can try and develop some better eating habits that are going to set you up later on, so that transition is a bit easier, then that's a really good thing to do. Living on a couple of chocolate bars, I mean, it's just not great. And actually all you're doing is it's just not great. You're just not getting enough nutrition from your diet. So
how do you think you actually get people interested in this? Because I think one of the issues is that there's not enough actual interest in, it's like, oh, I just want to get thin and that's it. I'm not actually interested in eating healthy, and none of this matters to me because now I'm thin.
Exactly, and I think that's the $1 million question. How do you get people engaged with it? Yeah. You don't want to go down the road of like, if you don't eat well, your hair's going to fall out, or some other horror story. That might work for some people, but I just don't think that's the right approach. I just don't know. I think I just don't know. I think it's hard enough to get people to eat well normally, but when you then don't have an appetite and you're not even motivated to eat because you don't have an appetite, then I think it's a massive challenge. So I think for me, it's raising awareness. I wrote this book, the Low Appetite Cookbook. I'm hoping that through publicity and gives them a bit of guidance, gives people a bit of guidance, might raise awareness of how you can do this in the right way. But I'm not saying anybody's going to listen, because like you said, some people are so thrilled to be losing weight, and it is life-changing for so many people. And not being interested in food, I think that's probably a real challenge.
And what do you think right now is the biggest challenge working in nutrition generally?
We touched on it before. I think that misinformation around it is really tricky. I think you're fighting a food environment that makes it really hard for people to eat well unless you've got the money to do it and the motivation. Yeah. So I think they're two really big challenges for me at the moment. And the misinformation thing, it is a bit of a nightmare because people don't even trust me anymore. If I go on TV and I talk about a topic, I went on and talked about healthy UPFs, which we talked about. I thought people would be thrilled that there are UPFs that they can eat, the Weetabix, the cooking sauces, that kind of thing. But all I got was a real backlash of, you're working in the pockets of the food industry, you're completely wrong. Baked beans have got 50 grams of sugar or something ridiculous I was getting. This has got 12 additives and it's not right. I'm like, I can show you the packet of the food and I can explain to you the whole situation, but there's a real distrust. Yeah. And that is when these people are turning to the people that just given out bad advice. That's a bit fringe nutrition. A lot of the biohackers, I'm not slagging off biohackers because I think it's really interesting, but a lot of those are promoting ways of eating and supplements and things that are just probably not right for a lot of people. And it's great if you want to try that, and there might be some research showing that what you're trying to do is great, but for the general population, you have to get those basics right, and you have to trust the people that know what they're talking about. Yeah,
I think that's a really interesting movement that's happening at the moment, which is that a lot of people are actually trusting the professionals and the people who have the credentials less, because of this narrative of you're in the pocket of the food industry, things like this, and instead you're trusting like the wellness influencer who says a bunch of things like add lemon to your water.
Yeah, exactly. And I work with a lot of brands, and I have done for years, and you have to do that in a responsible way. You choose the brands that you want to support because they share your ways of thinking about food. And I would rather somebody like me was influencing what they're saying than somebody that was an influencer that had no interest in nutrition but was just there to sell the product. So you won't really catch me that often with a product, occasionally, but it's the product I believe in. I think a lot of the time it's about education, and then you kind of bring that product in. But again, you've got to be careful. You've got to pick the right product. You know, if it's a healthy food, whatever it is, because it's really easy to lose your credibility as a nutritionist as well. So it's really important that you do it in the right way.
Why did you initially start working with the press?
So it was all by accident. So when I started working for myself, I wrote my first book with a friend of mine called The Detox Kitchen Bible, and that got a lot of attention. And then I got this job with a supplement brand, Healthspan, who I still work with today, and it was a great job because it was me coming in as the head of nutrition. They hadn't really got a nutritionist in there before that could work in the media, so it's really about me just getting the messaging out there, meeting a lot of journalists who've become, a lot of them become my friends now over the years, and just networking in that environment. And through that exposure, brands start to come to you. You have to say no a lot of the time because a lot of the stuff is not great. Yeah. So, but that's how that's kind of evolved. And I still do a lot of work now trying to keep myself in the media, and a lot of that stuff is done for free. So if you're thinking about going into this field, don't think it all just it just lands on your lap. You have to do a lot of work, networking and all that kind of stuff to get yourself out there and build your profile.
And how has it been working with brands? Have you, like, for example, you said that you say no a lot of the time. What sort of situations would you say no to? Okay,
I'll give you a really good example. So there was a little craze that I think is still sort of going on when it got hot for electrolytes. And I got approached by quite a few electrolyte brands who were wanting to sell their new products. And my argument was, I thought, great, if you can sell it as a sports nutrition product, that's cool, but it needs to have the right amount of electrolytes. None of them did. They were basically being sold as, soft drinks, telling people that they have a problem with hydration and telling people that the only way to hydrate yourself is with this electrolyte. And for me, that's just not the right way to do it. I just think you can have a bit of salt on your food, extra salt, you can have enough water and you can hydrate yourself. These things are sports supplements. When it's very hot, you're training, you're salty sweater, it's that kind of thing. So those kind of examples are when you just like, no, it's nice to be offered the money, but it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it.
And what are the, how do you know when you kind of trust a brand or trust the messaging? Have you ever been in a situation where you've started working with a brand and it hasn't been quite what you expected?
Yeah, I'm also often in a bit of conflict. Like companies be like, right, I want you to say this about this product. I'm kind of just like, well, you can't because it's just not right. It needs to be a lot more nuanced. You can't say this will do that. It's very much, it might do, the research suggests, do you know what I mean? There's ways of messaging. And I just won't get behind anything that I just don't think there was enough research for. I just don't think it's worth it.
And what's, other than that, what has been your experience in the public eye? Because I think the second that you start speaking out on any topic, right, you get like the people commenting certain things, saying...
Yeah, that is quite interesting. I mean, definitely don't read the comments. So I've done a lot of writing in the press, the Daily Mail, all these kind of papers, and people are not very kind. And any of the work on TV, if it goes on social media, again, people have always got a lot to say. But now I don't bother myself. I know that what I'm doing is what I believe in, which is educating people around food, nutrition, and hopefully doing that in a relatable way. If you want to sit on your chair behind your phone and start writing nasty comments, that's up to you. But I've learned now just to not paying attention to it. It doesn't bother me.
When did you first kind of realise that this was? Did you expect this to be such a kind of, so many people to have such an opinion on a thing?
Yeah, it was when I started, and actually it was when I started writing for the papers. And when you put yourself out there, you have to be 100% confident in what you're saying. And the way you do that is just to make sure you've got a bit of science to back yourself up. Yeah. And then if you know that it's backed by science and you know what you're saying is right, then it doesn't matter what anybody else says. You've always got a solid grounding. But yeah, definitely in those early days. And also one of the problems with writing in the press is often you don't have any control over the headline. So you can write an article, it's all lovely, it's all nuanced, it's all balanced, but then they'll slap a headline on, and a lot of people don't read beyond the headline. Yeah. So that is when you start getting a lot of comments. So I wrote an article in the early days about carbohydrates. I was like, we need to stop demonizing carbohydrates. They're not the reason that people put on weight. They're all very different. And the article headline was, leading nutritionist says carbs don't make you fat. And immediately, I just got all this stuff and it was coming into my inbox. I was invited to radio interviews, like I just found something new out. And I just thought, crikey, this is the power of the media. Yeah. So you do have to sort of watch what you say and just deal with it if it happens. Yeah.
And what do you think, so over in your entire time being kind of in the press and in public media, has there been anything that you've said previously that then, you know, research changed, or something, your opinion on it changed, and you've had to speak on that, or situations like this?
I don't really worry about that. I just think that nutrition changes all the time. This is why a career in nutrition is, you have to keep up with it. You can't just sit there and work 9 to 5 and then think that that's going to be okay for the whole of your career, because the science changes, thinking changes, everything changes all the time. So I think if you wrote an article 10 years ago, the science has changed and that's kind of a bit different now. I don't think you really need to worry about it. Unfortunately, with online, everything stays there. So there's always going to be stuff that you've written that has now changed. And that's okay. Just from that point forward, you just talk about the new stuff in a new way. And I think that's fine.
And how have you been able to kind of maintain that trust with media and continuously kind of stay in the public eye?
I think I try and give a really balanced approach. I try and give them the science with what I do. I get back to them very quickly. I'm quick to respond. I think all of those things together kind of help. Yeah, and just supporting, just giving out the right message. Yeah, nothing too extreme.
And what do you think is the most difficult thing about kind of doing these kinds of things?
You need to have a lot of confidence in what you're saying, and I think that comes from experience. I think that if you've got a lot of experience at what you're doing and you genuinely know what you're saying, and you're generally saying what you're saying is to do with your actual belief, and you're living this, you're breathing it, then I think that's cool. I think the challenges probably are, for me the challenge is just keeping up with the new trends and trying to just keeping up with the environment, the whole landscape, so you have a good idea of what's going on. You know, I don't particularly like a lot of this stuff that biohackers say, but I still need to know what they're saying so I can keep track of it all and put it into context. So it is quite hard being an expert, like trying to be an expert in everything and trying to keep all that information in your head. I do find that quite difficult. And then trying to disseminate everything in a way that people can understand. That is really easy and relatable. That is quite a challenge as well.
You mentioned the biohackers like a few times. What do you think are the interesting things that you've seen in that space at the moment that seem to be? Yeah,
I don't know why I keep mentioning biohackers. I really don't have a problem with biohackers. I'm just using them as kind of one example of a group that I think give out information that's I'm just going to say very fringe. And I think that, new types of supplements, new types of training, new types of diet. You know, somebody has to push the boundary somewhere, and it's great. But I just don't think it's for everybody. And I think you have to start for the general population. I think you need to start at the basics. I also think biohacking is very expensive, and it's for people that can afford it and that kind of thing. So, you know, for me, it's the other way. I like to think about people who are challenged with their budgets and access and all that kind of stuff. That floats my boat more, is how to get them to eat healthy.
Yeah, because also at the moment we've got this longevity trend, and you know, people like Brian Johnson coming into media and telling people to eat some very weird things. What's your perspective on that, and kind of why is actually the entire world so interested in this space at the moment? Yeah,
it's weird, isn't it? I mean, longevity's been around for a while. We had like the blue zones, and I think is it Okinawa that has the biggest number of people that are over 100. I think it's fascinating. I think that for me, it's not really about longevity. It's all right living long, but I think it's more about your health span. So making sure that you live healthy. And for me, I think that's more important. And that comes down to balanced diet, good lifestyle, plenty of sleep, all the basics that you want to put into place. And there's an element of genetics as well. You know, some people naturally live longer without disease and maybe don't have the healthiest diet their whole life. But I don't know what the obsession is with living longer. I mean, he hasn't extended his life that much, has he, Brian Johnson, considering how many millions he spent and what he puts himself through. So rather than focusing on getting an extra 5 years out of your life, just focus on living a really healthy life free of disease. I think that's where the focus should be.
And on the topic of the balanced diet, if you know, for just the average person who's listening to this, what in your perspective is the balanced diet? How do you actually maintain that?
Yeah, this is going to be so boring, but again, it's like the Mediterranean diet for me is a really good way of eating. So, you know, make sure you've got plenty of plant foods, fruits, vegetables, beans, pulses, lentils, all those kind of things. good lean proteins, don't overdo the protein, make sure you're getting enough fiber, and don't lose the joy in food as well. It's something that people don't really talk about, but just enjoy food. Like, it can become quite joyless when you start going down the path of these specific diets and cutting out food groups and whatever else is you're doing. And food is there to be enjoyed. There's a community involved with food as well. It's really important. It's important when you're feeding kids, they can learn about food. It's important the other end of people with dementia, so they can retain memories around food. So there's lots of interesting things around food that I like, and I think it's really important. It's not just about that maintaining the balanced food, the specific nutrients. There's a lot more to it as well.
I think there's a lot of conversation as well happening around food kind of being medicine and the effects of nutrition on dementia and things like this. What have you seen in your experience? How much can food actually impact your health, or even actually cure certain conditions?
Yeah, I think food as medicine is it's quite a weird expression, isn't it? Because food is not medicine. So medicine is medicine, and that cures you. I think what food can do is it can help to prevent disease. So it's a bit of a nuance, but I think that eating the right kind of foods can prevent you from getting heart disease, type 2 diabetes, all these chronic conditions. It can help to prevent cancer. It's not guaranteed, but it can definitely put in the right path for prevention. I think there are elements where food could almost be seen as a medicine. So if you're thinking about high cholesterol, we know there are certain elements of food that can help to lower your LDL cholesterol. So eating more soluble fibre from beans, pulses, lentils, soy protein, other elements of your diet. So that way, it sort of is like a medicine, but it's not going to be like a statin. Yeah. It's the same way with GLP-1 drugs. People are like, oh, just eat protein and fibre because it releases GLP-1. And that's just like taking the drug. It's not like taking the drug. The drug amplifies these effects and it takes away that food noise. All you're talking about there is satiety and keeping you full. So I think that, it's a bit of a nuance, I think. So it kind of is, but it kind of isn't. Yeah.
And what do you think the most dangerous thing with so many people taking GLP-1s at the moment is?
I don't know what it is. For me, I think it's opened up loads of interesting conversations. I think I'm interested to see how the food industry responds to this. So in the States, one company is now putting GLP friendly on the label. Oh, wow. I don't think that's a good way to go. I think once you start making this niche, then it becomes, could get an influx of foods that have a specific aisle in the supermarket. Do you know what I mean? And
what does that even mean? What does GLP?
So I think what they're trying to say is that it's nutrient dense, it's got protein, it's got a good source of fibre, it's got a good source of nutrients in small portions of food. That's great. If that's a frozen meal, a fresh food, someone's designed it in a specific way, that's brilliant. If we start getting bars on the shelf that are ultra processed, so people have made them less fatty because they've added an emulsifier, or they've added vitamins and minerals, or they've taken out the sugar and added a sweet. You could go down that road of diet foods again. So I think that with the food industry, I think it's more about them embracing low appetite eating. And thinking about that and normalising that as a thing rather than making it specifically GLP-1 and sort of stigmatising that.
What are the key components of low appetite eating that kind of people need to know?
So it's small amounts of food and nutrient density. So thinking a good source of protein, so trying to get about 20 grams, 25 grams of protein in there, making sure you've got a good source of fibre, and then making sure that it's just packed with the ingredients that are going to give you lots of nutrients, vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, all that kind of thing. It's not that easy to do. Yeah. When I did my book, and it was quite hard actually thinking about what the portion size should be, because low appetite eating is very different for somebody who's 5'1" to a guy who's 6'3", the portion size. So you have to start with quite small amounts of food, and I think you just have to add to it as your appetite differs, if that makes sense. Yeah, yeah. But it still has to have the same nutrient density, has to be very rich in nutrients. Yeah.
And last question, what would you say to any healthcare professionals or people trying to educate the public, get into this space? Do you have any advice?
Yeah, I don't know what advice I have.
Just brace.
Don't do it. No, I think that you have to have confidence in what you're saying. You have to make sure that what you're saying is evidence-based. It's got to be bulletproof, and then nobody can knock you for it. It's quite a tough industry, and don't expect to get paid for everything. TV's great. It doesn't pay that well. It's great for publicity. A lot of the stuff you do in the papers, giving comments, all that stuff. Again, that's what you do to build your profile. So don't think you're going to make a living on that. But Yeah, it's tough. It's a lot of work. And actually working for yourself is hard as well. You know, you don't switch off. This isn't a 9 to 5 job. I'm always thinking about work. And if I'm not thinking about the work I've got to do, I'm thinking about how I get more work in. And it does help as you evolve. You know, I've now got agents, a book agent. I've got an agent that deals with my brand work. So that makes it a bit easier. But you've got to get to that point first. It's about building your profile to start with. And that's just about networking, having something to say. I think that's another good point, is you've got to have something to say. You can't just sort of, I just want to work and tell people about food and nutrition in the media. You kind of, people have to want to come to you for a reason, and I think, and that comes with knowledge and having a way of delivering it.
And how have you chosen over your career what your kind of key points and key messaging is?
I always try and do food first, but obviously I know there's a time for other things in the diet. I try and keep it really relatable, and I try and translate the science and information through food, because I think that's the most important thing. You know, I always say you can tell people anything, but everybody's got to feed themselves. So at night, they're in their kitchen, they're opening cupboards, and they've got to know what to eat. And that means you need to know how to use food. Yeah. So I think that's one of the most important things for me. Yeah.
Okay, amazing.
Does that help?
Yes, fantastic. Thank you so much, Rob.
That's okay.